Magic. There we go. Okay, second speaker after lunch. That's always a challenge. Who had the pasta for lunch? I just sort of got a bit of work out who I've got to have the eye contact with. Okay. And the beef, you know, the protein will slow your metabolism down, so I need to keep the eye contact with that. Look, just out of interest, so I understand who's in the audience. So who in the audience is from government? Works in government? Just give me a bit of an idea. Local government, keep your hands up. Yep, good on your right. Waving the flag, mate. And industry groups, industry sectors, representatives. Okay. Look, when Neil stuffs it, I have to fix it. That's essentially how it works. No, sorry, Neil, it's Mother Nature. You just tell us how much it gets stuffed. Look, what I'm going to do, we've just got a short period here. There's been an awful lot going on in Queensland in the last 12 months, and there's also more happening now, as you saw from up there. So what I'm going to do is just give you a snapshot of the things that we've been dealing with. You would have seen a lot of the stuff in media and images and so forth, but I'll give you a rundown on where we're up to, who we are as the Reconstruction Authority, and then a couple of examples of, I guess, what I'm calling policy in action, so to speak, where we've identified some gaps and tried to rapidly respond to those to I guess, change the face on how reconstruction is being dealt with. And then I'll finish with a few happy snaps, which will show you basically how things were and how they are now. So just to give a bit of background. Last year, we actually got hit with 7 different events. When the authority was first set up, we only had about 66% of the state declared. By the end of Cyclone Yasi turning up and a few other floods came around the place, we ended up with the whole state declared. So that's 73 local government areas, the whole state. So you can see there, the area down the bottom is that famed, you know, where all the floods are and the rivers, is that famed area equivalent to France and Germany. It's a very big state, I'm finding. More recently though, this year, we've had more hits, and you would have seen the St George and Roma and Mitchell and so forth going out. And you can sort of see the comparison. I'll sort of flip back to the previous one if I can. So that one there, see the dark red there? Similar areas got hit again. So you've got areas that have been hit twice, 3 times. Roma, for example, got hit twice last year. Dalby got hit a couple of times last year as well, got hit again this year. Okay, so the challenge around that in reconstruction is how you get on with the task, because you've got this continual moisture coming through. Okay, so who's the authority? Just a very quick snapshot. Basically, we're a statutory authority that's been set up under a piece of legislation, passed through Parliament in 3 days, had bilateral support, basically to get on with the job. We've got some pretty powerful pieces of, I suppose, legislation there, which draws on some other aspects of legislation. As mentioned in the precursor, I was the Coordinator General up there. There's an Act, State Development Public Works Organisation Act, which has some pretty strong powers. A lot of those are drawn across to the Reconstruction Authority Act, and then there's a whole range of other things which allow us to get on and do some stuff pretty rapidly. The other aspect to it is all the money to do with reconstruction comes via the Reconstruction Authority. So it doesn't go via the different agencies as it would under a traditional environment. Basically, the 2 treasuries, federal and state, got together and said, yes, we want it to come through. So we can track the dollars where they come in and go out. Part of the authority's role is to actually manage and coordinate the distribution of that money. We don't treat it like a grant scheme, we actually treat it like a very large capital works program. Okay, because most of the works, I'll show in a sec, most of the works is roads. We did a state plan, and you would have seen the military guys involved, Mick Slater originally and now Richard Wilson, both Majors General. They brought in a bunch of guys from the planning areas in the military, and they were great. Working closely with those guys, come up with a state plan which effectively distills down to these 3 activities. But essentially what it did is set up what they called lines of reconstruction, and those lines of reconstruction link into the various interest groups and the various industry groups and so forth. So there's an economic line of reconstruction which links into tourism, mining, agriculture and so forth. So we can draw intelligence from off the ground, what's happening, and we can find out, well, what's not working and what is working. Is there particular freight routes that aren't working properly, and how do we link that into the roads line of reconstruction? So put this really good network of communication in place. You'd think it would happen naturally, but by everyone in the room being focused, it actually brought everyone's mind onto the task at hand. And I'd have to say everybody went about it the right way. They just couldn't help enough. So where are we at the moment? Well, the first phase was really about the recovery, get the band-aids on and get the roads open, get the trucks moving, get freight happening, so get the economy reignited. Then we're into the hard phase now, which is the reconstruction, and that's what we're well and truly up to our neck in at the moment. $7.5 billion worth of work to be done. Even if you were trying to do that as a single set of infrastructure, you know, in a planned environment, it would be a challenge. We've got it across the whole state, and we're trying to get that mobilised. So what that meant is we had to co-opt support. We operate a pretty delegated model, which is allowing local governments to get on and do their roads, Department of Main Roads do their roads, the range of agricultural agencies and so forth, DPIs and so forth, working on with those different people. And what our role is to coordinate, making sure that that all happens and happens in accordance with the rules set by EMA. So where are we up to at the moment? Basically, there's $4.3 billion worth of activity happening in Queensland at the moment. So in that figure, you can see up there about 3.1 of that is either complete, out to market, out to tender, under evaluation, under construction, or in the process of being closed out. So that is what's happening in Queensland at the moment. We've got about another $1.2 billion will be hitting the market in the next 2 to 3 months, okay? So as you can see, it's really starting to ramp up. If I showed you a graph of the previous, we generate these numbers every month. If I showed you a graph of the previous, you'd see this from about August last year, this massive ramp up of activity. You can't start works overnight, but once the mobilisation happens, we're seeing a really good pickup. So that's the sort of overall program. What I want to do here is just jump into a couple of areas where we've actually sort of seen some gaps and trying to sort of accelerate some activities. We've done a bunch of things. You would have heard about Grantham. I'll talk about that in a minute. Floodplain management. Basically, we looked and saw there's some gaps. It sort of fell between different agencies. You know, the Bureau of Meteorology is interested in it, EMQ is interested in it, and so is Department of Natural Resources, but nobody was really sort of grabbing it and working out, well, what is the floodplain? And you saw the size of Queensland, it's enormous. So I'll talk about that in a sec. Rebuilding in storm-tide prone areas. The storm surge that came off Cyclone Yasi was quite significant. It was, the devastation we saw up there was akin to what we saw in Grantham. Fast moving water with just a huge surge. So, I mean, you would have seen the tsunami pictures up of Japan, similar to that but on a smaller scale. But when water just starts moving, it just doesn't stop, picks up debris and just keeps going. So the whole house is just picked up and moved about 200 metres and then smeared across the countryside. So we saw that on the storm surge and we saw it with the flash flooding. So the two areas where we saw this sort of really significant damage, flash flooding and storm surge. Wind resistant housing, again, knowledge is increasing around cyclone impacts, and we're working with the cyclone testing station there. Electrical infrastructure is an interesting one where, you know, right from residential houses through to office blocks and commercial. People, you know, haven't had a flood for 30, 40 years, and the amount of commercial buildings that actually had their transformers in the basements, okay, filled with water. You think, oh, why would you do that? I can guarantee, go around many towns, you'll find them in the basements because it's the cheapest place to put them. But that's what knocked out. So basically, most of Brisbane's legal fraternity couldn't get back into their office because all the CBD office buildings had all their power taken out. And the automatic trigger for when the power goes out is for all the lifts to go down to the basement. So all the lifts filled up with mud as well. Okay, so those sorts of things are the sort of lessons being learned out of this. The resources for reconstruction, the big issue also is how much material is out there, aggregate, can you get petroleum products out there, as in bitumen products and so forth, what sand and gravel, and this is all these competing things. Plus we've got the mining sector happening and we've got the coal seam gas happening at the same time, so everybody's competing for labour and competing for resources. So we've done a paper on that which sort of looks at where we think the hot spots are going to be. No great surprises. I mean, when you looked at those red hot spots that I showed you on the maps before, that just coincidentally happens to be where all the coal seam and mining is at the moment as well. So we've got a couple of really tight areas as far as needs for human resources go. Okay, floodplain management, I touched on that before. I won't go through this in detail, but essentially what we're saying is, you know, most of Australia and Queensland particularly, is in a floodplain. We've mapped the floodplain now. 26% of Queensland is actually a floodplain. Okay? Most towns are actually in floodplains. So what it is this issue of saying you can do an element of protection, but also you can do a bit of preparation for it as well. So one of it is, well, Queensland houses. Get up on stilts, water comes in, water goes out. And probably the classic of that is Depot Hill in Rockhampton, where it was, you know, we would have seen for several weeks just prior to Christmas and just after Christmas, people sitting on their doorsteps in Rockhampton with water up there, some of them refusing to leave and so forth. But when the water went out, they were some of the first people back into their houses because they were all up in Queenslanders. It's the low-set brick houses with the plasterboard on the side that are the ones who have suffered the most. Okay.